We've invested in Flutterwave. You've actually invested in Andela and Pharma. Walk us through that journey.
We were at a bar in Lusaka and we're grabbing drinks and Greg is telling me about the idea. And at that moment, I just knew. Something hit me. I just knew. I said, this idea is brilliant. And so immediately, I went to an ATM. Kid you know, I took out money and I told Greg, look, I'm going to make a deposit. I get very annoyed when you have all these people giving all these motivational talks and lying to young people. There are certain things you do, but it's dishonest to try and go there and just say, oh, just work hard. Working hard alone doesn't do it. In the last 8 years, unprecedented levels of corruption and rot that pervaded all elements of society. Because overnight, if you had 4 million cedis of assets, you had $1 million. By the time they left power, that 4 million cedis on your balance sheet was worth $250,000. I wanted us to Andela to build their HQ for Africa, their hub for Africa, co-located there. Then we can bring IBM, Google, Microsoft. So we almost create this cluster, right, of tech giant. We create an ecosystem. And instead of recognizing how positive this will be for the country, as people were more interested in what's in it for me.
Decades apart, a decade into the future. If there's something you could tell me now, using myself as a point of contact for young entrepreneurs who are trying to build something valuable for this African continent, a decade ahead, what would you tell me? Okay, community. Thanks for showing up here again. To all our old folks and the new ones. So I just had a conversation with Sangu Delle, and two things really. First off, I'm a big fanboy of Sangu Delle, and I really hope my fanboyness was not seeping all through the conversation. It's quite unbelievable. I remember when Dick told me about the prospects of this podcast, one of the names that was on top of our list was Sangu Delle. And here we are, had a 2-hour conversation with him. A very heavy conversation at that. Just to give you an overview, Sangu is the chairman and founder of Golden Palm Investments. They've been the capital power for a couple of iconic startups in the African ecosystem. Think about Pharma, Flutterwave, Andela. Yeah, Sangu is a guy who powered them from the beginning. He's also the CEO for CarePoint, formerly African Health Holdings. You know, a tech-forward, tech-driven health startup that's doing amazing work. From his foundations, he sits on numerous boards, Harvard Advisory Board, Harvard Medical School Board, Ashesi University. I think he's the board chair for Ashesi University. So yeah, very loaded guy. And we spoke about his journey, his perspective on the African continent, the prospects. He wrote a book. Sangu is a real powerhouse. And I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited for you. They're about to listen to this conversation. Well, that said, I really hope you enjoyed the conversation with Sangu. But then we've already made it clear that we are taking on the journey as a community to read books in our attempt to create our own entrepreneurial stories, right? And the book we decided to read is the UT Story by the autobiography of Captain Kofi Amwabe. We are going to start reading this book in June, on the 1st of June. We're still exploring how we're going to keep ourselves accountable. We're open to feedback from you as our community on how we think we can structure this. Ways that will be convenient for you. So you can shoot us a DM on our socials, the Peswa, or send me an email, host@thepeswa.com. So yeah, I can't wait for us to delve into this book together and take on this journey. So enjoy the conversation with Sangu. Okay, great. So I think, like I was saying, I'm actually surprised. I'm shocked, still in shock that I'm about to have this conversation with you. Because for me and the person, like I mentioned, we are like fanboys. We really admire what you represent. Especially for me on a personal level, what it means to be a person of capacity and being spent for the African cause, especially the African cause. And so when Dick told me, when you started to do this podcast, and you said, okay, we're going to take this journey, one of the top tier names we were thinking about was you, right?
Too kind.
And all it took was for me to reach out on Twitter, on X, and you replied. Like, we were so shocked that you actually responded, and here you are.
Well, let me tell you something funny, and maybe I'll get in trouble by saying this, but so emails, I literally have probably like, let me check, something of the order of, see, I've seen here 40,000 plus unread emails. So emails get tough because they get overwhelming.
Yeah.
LinkedIn gets choked. WhatsApp gets choked. X is like the best place. Funny enough, it's the one place that my unread emails is zero, because very few people assume you're going to respond on X, but I actually respond to every message on X. Though now I feel like after saying this, I'm going to be in trouble.
You're actually going to be in trouble. And so what made you say yes to the request, the invitation?
So to me, it's very simple, right? I actually consider it a privilege, right? I consider it a privilege to be able to share knowledge, right? And share experiences. I wouldn't be where I am, or I wouldn't have accomplished 10% of what I've accomplished if it wasn't for the generosity of those ahead of me who shared their knowledge, shared their wisdom, shared their experiences, and mentored me. And so for me, I consider it a moral responsibility to pay it forward.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the second time I've heard you use that line, moral responsibility. You mentioned how it was about your book.
Yes.
And how you feel like you more or less had a moral responsibility to tell the African story. We get to that. But you're not 40 yet. You're thinking 38, 39.
Yep.
And you've done remarkable things in this short while. You started very impactful companies. So Golden Palm Investments that has gone ahead to invest in startups like M-Pharma, Dela, Flatwave. These are like iconic startups in the African ecosystem. Raise billions of dollars in venture funding, impactful work. There is CarePoint, formerly Africa Health Holdings, great work. Tech forward health care system you're building. There's Clean Aqua. There's your foundation. You're an author of a book, the African making futures, right? You sit on boards from schools, Ashesi University, PEDI, all of that, and you're so many recognitions, and you're not even 40 yet. And so I kept asking myself, what could be the batteries behind such a person? What early stage underpinnings could make somebody this way? And then I saw your talk at Helsinki 8-9 years ago. Story about you and your dad.
Slash.
Yes.
Yes.
And you're telling the story about how you had a tradition with your dad.
Yes.
And that in that hour drive going to school, you had to deal with him. You're going to read The Economist.
Yeah.
And then you tell him what you had learned. And that's like, I now understand the male. How you have become what you've become. There's another story of your mom, where you were scoring hundreds in all like your courses in school, and then you got a 92 in social studies. And she told you she was disappointed.
Yeah, it was a 95. It was I got 19 out of 20, so it was a 95%, and she was not happy.
And so it brings me to the question: how was growing up like?
Yeah,
Having parents who had these high-level standards, what kind of values did they instill in you growing up?
It's a good question, and I will first off start with you asked how is this possible, right? And I think for me it's very simple. It's faith, which is the single most important thing that my parents instilled in me, right? And so I always say this, and sometimes people think I'm being self-deprecating, but I'm being extremely sincere. There is not a single thing I have accomplished or achieved in this life that is of my doing, right? I've always believed, and my life is living proof that it is the work of the Lord, right? And I'll break it down in ways. Look, people say, or you mentioned that you're not even 40. My Lord and Savior was not 40 either. Right? He was 33.
Yeah.
Right? When he saved the whole world. And so our faith has a tradition of young people in leadership. Our Savior was a young man in leadership. Just, sometimes we overlook that part of the story of Christ. Imagine this. This wasn't just a man at a time who was coming to challenge the status quo and was coming to disrupt the order of the day. This was a young man, his early 30s, right? And for me, that alone sets the template and the example, right? I always refer to scripture. One of my favorite verses that growing up, I always had it on my desk, 1 Timothy 4:12, right? Which is, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity, right? And so number one for me is faith. Look, when I was doing graduate school, I did the Doctor of Law at Harvard Law School, the MBA at Harvard Business School, and the PhD in Economic Anthropology at BHAM at the same time as I was working and writing a book. It doesn't make sense. When you do the math, it doesn't make sense, right? In fact, I was nominated for a fellowship, and the fellowship thought my CV was made up. Seriously, they thought this was some Africa 419 thing someone has, because they have had a history of some of that. So they reached out to one of the recommenders, Henry Louis Gates Jr., to say that, hey, someone is bringing fake applications and putting your name on it. And he said, who is that? He saw it and he said, no, that's one of my students. Now, I say that because it doesn't make sense from a human perspective, but it makes sense from a spiritual perspective, right? Because what the Lord does in my life is he allows things to happen that will not make sense, right? To show his hands in my life. And that's why if I give myself the glory, I'm lying to you.
So I was going to ask this question about, because I realize you're very vocal about your spirituality on your tweets, in interviews I've seen. That something brought you to the place of recognition and surrender to God. I mean, you grew up in a bi-religious home. Your mom was a Muslim, your dad is a Christian, Catholic. And at some point, you came to a certain appreciation and embraced the faith, right? Would you want to touch on that? What happened?
Of course. Look, I was raised, both my parents are very strong believers, right? And so from a very young age, I was raised in the faith. At about age 4, I was the youngest mass ever at Christ the King, right? Now with, and I'm sure a lot of young people relate to this, you grow up, you go to church all the time, you grow up in the faith. Then you grow up, you get a bit older and you lose your way a bit, right? You start getting concerned with other things and you want to hang out with your friends and play and party and all of that. But I think the seminal moment for me was when you go through certain experiences in which you are forced to go on your knees, right? Those experiences, you recognize the limits of your humanity and you recognize that you are nothing. You're completely nothing. And you have no choice but to look up and remember who your God is and who your Father is. And that, to me, was the moment and the inflection point of
what happened?
Renewed faith. Well, I've shared a lot of this openly. This was, I think even, was it last year or so? I was on a program with Manifest.
Okay.
Right, where I shared the experience.
Where you were like $5 million.
$5 million in debt, right? Where, and I was, I think I was 26 at the time. You go through that, you will know God.
Okay.
Right? You will know God. You will look for him.
Yeah.
And so when he took me through that, it changes how you look at the world.
Yeah.
Right? And I'll tell you also, two interesting things that also happened to me. In 2013, October 2013 to be precise, I was in law school. And I had a very weird dream. In the dream, more like a nightmare, in which I died. I woke up terrified, truly terrified. Of course, I didn't go back to bed. And I stayed up reflecting and asking myself the question, well, what if I had died? What if I had died? And at that moment, I realized that I wasn't ready to die, right? And I never wanted to ever have that feeling of not being ready to die, right? And so I vowed to myself that day to live differently, right? To live in a way where you are ready for death. Because Shakespeare, and this was a quote, if you remember the story I told about my dad and I used to love Shakespeare. We used to read Shakespeare together, and we'll finish each other's quotes. And there was one quote we'd always share together, which was, I think, Caesar 2, scene 3 or so, where he said, of all the wonders of this earth, it seems to me most strange that men should fear, knowing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. And so I resolved to live differently. I resolved to live life knowing that tomorrow is not guaranteed and today is all you have.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you live life like that, you move differently, because every day you wake up is a gift. Yeah. Today is a gift. I don't take it for granted that I woke up today and I'm able to come and do this podcast today. I don't take it for granted. Today is a gift. Every day I wake up and I'm alive. I wake up and I say, hallelujah. Today is a gift. I've been gifted 24 hours. What do I do with that? Right? 10 years from that experience, literally exactly 10 years, same time, October 2023. I got in a car accident, a very, very insane car accident that had spiritual undertones to it. And I emerged unscathed in what was nothing short of a miraculous intervention. And that happening 10 years after the dream was not lost on me. 10 years to the month was not lost on me. I keep a frame pic. The car was completely totaled. I have a frame picture of it in my office, my house, to just remind me of the sanctity of life and how we need to be grateful for life, and of purpose and of what really matters. And it reinforces that 2013 resolution to live differently, to live with a different type of purpose.
Very interesting. And so I see that you have been intentional with your life, and you are, for the most part, like I said earlier on, been very focused on the African narrative, more so the economic narrative of the African continent. And I also wanted to understand where that came from. And I got to understand that, well, there was this, I don't know if that's true, but then your parents were housing refugees in your house when you're growing up. And your mom, and more like a very Pan-African household. Your dad is Ghanaian, your mom is Egyptian, and there's some Burkinabe somewhere. Yeah. Is that right? Is that a good way to understand where your passion for the African continent?
Yes, so I'll say that I was raised in a Pan-African household, right? Proudly Ghanaian, but with roots, as you've identified, also in Egypt and Burkina Faso. And so I always joke that I'm an African mutt, you know. But I was shaped deeply by some of those formative experiences growing up. My father and Dr. Ibn Chambas and a few others had set up the African Commission on Health and Human Rights back in the 80s. And so that organization, they were deeply involved in supporting refugees from the civil conflicts in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So I grew up with many of these refugees in our homes, men whose limbs had been chopped off, And I was 5, 6 years old being exposed to this. Grandmothers who had been brutally raped by child soldiers, young enough to be their grandchildren, right? And so those experiences stained my conscience, right? And lit a fire in me to want to fight for the progress of our continent and the development of our continent. At the same time, I also recognized in growing up and experiencing the different faces of the African continent. And you realize that our continent the narrative of our continent is often misrepresented, underdeveloped, and is too often told by outsiders, right? We're not telling our own stories. And those who tell the stories from the outside, it doesn't have the same depth, it doesn't have the same weight. And so for me, the African narrative needs to be reclaimed, reimagined, and retold by Africans, for Africans, and for the world to hear from us on our own terms. Right? That's so important to me because we can talk about all the development that we need. And I'm involved in a lot of these things. Yes, we need to support entrepreneurs. Yes, we need the right sorts of economic policies. Yes, we need infrastructural development. Yes, we need to upgrade our healthcare infrastructure, education. There are all these things we need to do. But underpinning all of that has to be who we are, our dignity, our purpose, our strength as a people, because that's what's going to permeate and carry through all of this. And you see that when you go to China, for example. The progress and the accomplishments and achievements of the Chinese people is not accidental. You drill down to their underlying philosophies, and the Chinese people are very proud and very determined, and they have a worldview, right? You see the same thing in India. You see the same thing in Russia. You see the same thing in these other places. So the question for us is, what is our worldview? How do we look at the world? What is our perspective? And how do we approach the world firm in our belief systems, right? Where we're not just yanked all over the place, but there's a very clear sense of where we're going and why we're going there, right? And the last, you look at that, to me, is part of what made Kwame Nkrumah so great, and why it was unsurprising that he won the poll for the greatest African of the millennium. Because whether you agree with him or you disagree with him, one thing you cannot dismiss is he had a worldview, right? He had a very clear worldview. He had a very clear philosophy that centered us as Africans, and that created our own independent thought, independent mind, independent charts forward.
Okay. As a young man, you grew up with a father, parents, with these heavy influences on the African continent. You've done great work across the continent. Even with your book, visited 45 African countries over the span of 7 years, spoke to 600 entrepreneurs. You've really interfered with this continent. You've invested, you're doing work here. What is your worldview about the African continent?
My worldview about the African continent is we don't have a worldview. No, but in all seriousness, I see so much potential for us, right? In the last 8 years, for example, and I was very vocal about this online and on social media, so it's no surprise that I was deeply disturbed by the events that happened in our country, by what I called and insist was, it's not that we haven't had corruption before, but this was unprecedented, right? Unprecedented levels of corruption and rot that pervaded all elements of society, wanton disregard for some of the fundamental pillars that uphold our society. We saw a significant erosion in press freedom, right? We saw blatant disregard for certain constitutional processes and safeguards. We saw a whole lot of issues. And of course, we saw economic Armageddon, right? Where for the first time in our lifetimes, we defaulted on our debt, which has not been done. Haircuts on domestic debt, pensioners losing. I mean, these were horrendous times. And at some point, I was so downcast and almost depressed by what was going on, because overnight, everybody in Ghana, for every $1 of assets you have, it was now worth 25 cents. Because think about it. At the time the last regime took over office, right, in 2017, if you had 4 million cedis of assets, you had $1 million worth of assets. At the time, so if you had a company with a balance sheet of 4 million Ghana cedis, you had $1 million worth of assets on your balance sheet. By the time they left power, that 4 million cedis on your balance sheet was worth $250,000. So through all the hard work, through nothing you've done, right? Through nothing you've done, because of failed economic policies and failed leadership, you've lost 75% of the value. So to get back to the original value, you have to quadruple your assets. You have to 4x your assets. Just think about that. You 4x your business to stand still. That's why I joked with somebody and I said, in describing the economic situation in the last 8 years, I was telling a friend that imagine you're running as fast as you can, but you're on a very steep hill. So you are running so fast only to stand still. That was the situation.
Yeah.
But imagine you don't run fast. You just slide all the way down, right?
Yeah.
And but in all of this, what kept me going and what kept me inspired was young people. I am so, even though I didn't go to Ashesi, I'm so passionate about Ashesi. And I give so much to Ashesi because Ashesi, I always say, Ashesi saved me. Seeing the students and what they're doing, their passions, their creativity, their innovation, it gave me hope. It gave me so much hope for the future that even though I was disillusioned in terms of what the political class or the old guard could offer for us, I'm deeply inspired by the younger generation. And what I saw at Ashesi gave me great hope for what could be.
Interesting. Hearing you talk about Africa and the whole, I mean, I saw your tweets back then and how it even got into trouble, things on your life and all of that. I want to ask this question. When are you running for office? Hello, friends. So, sorry to interrupt you. I know you're enjoying this conversation and I'm so sorry about rudely interrupting you. But then it's come to our attention that about 82% of you guys who consume our content have not subscribed. Your subscription goes a long way to help us and encourages us as a team to keep bringing you what we bring you every week. So just do us a little favor. Hit the subscribe button, share, and if possible, comment. Thank you.
So I'll go back to what I shared in the beginning when you asked me what is the underlying explanatory variable for all of this. What explains my life thus far? And I told you that it was faith, right? So when I was younger, and again, there's evidence of this in some interviews and all of that. I've always been very interested in politics as a vehicle for change, right? Okay. I volunteered on the Obama campaign in 2012 and in 2008 and in 2012. So in 2000, when I was in the US in school, I worked on his campaign in 2008 and 2012. I've supported a lot of campaigns in the US and here as well. Friends who are running for office, helping them with with strategy, policy, and so on and so forth. But from a faith perspective, I've always believed that the Lord rules in the affairs of men, right? And so one massive change that has happened with me is, whereas in the past, right? In the past, I would come out and have maybe this is a particular ambition or thing that I want to do, right? And I would lay it out and I'll go after it. I no longer approach life that way, right? I now look at things very differently, where I try to be guided by where the Lord wants to take me.
Okay.
So I always refer to Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And so what I know I'm passionate about is, I'm passionate about good governance and transformational leadership on this continent. Okay. The means in which that will end up will be in accordance with what the Lord tells me.
Yeah.
Right? So
looking at things with a mere eye, right? Seeing how, even taking your father again, I think you have good reason to believe that is a really great influence in your life, right? And I gather that even with like what you're doing with like an entrepreneurial space, entrepreneurial exploits, hearing that story you shared in Helsinki gave me good reasons that, okay, well, this man has engineered his son to be this way. Now your dad has, what's it called? He was the CPP chairman, right? Heavily involved in politics. So I really would, I'm expecting to see it roll out with his son as well. For such a very intentional man who has engineered his son to be this economic powerhouse, entrepreneurial powerhouse, who seems passionate about our political landscape, I have good reason to think that he has raised you with similar underpinnings, and it's just a matter of time that he plays out.
So I'll tell you something interesting. What you attribute to the father is correct, but you are pointing to the wrong father.
Fair enough.
Right? And case in point, if my father had his way, I would be a dermatologist by now. And I would also be a very strong, bona fide member of the Convention People's Party. But we chart our own paths.
Yeah.
And there's no question, both my parents have been extremely influential in my upbringing and have imparted, I always say that all the positives I attribute after the Lord to their upbringing, all the negatives are mine only. And I'm me not listening to what they taught to me. But yes, I did grow up with political awareness, right? Because my father would have all these. And don't forget, back then, CPP was banned as a political party. And so I grew up seeing a lot of these things. I grew up when he'll be having all these meetings. So I was very aware, right? I was very politically aware from a very young age. And I think in many ways that sparked my interest in how can politics be used as a vehicle for positive change, positive transformation. It's unfortunate that it's gotten a very negative, it comes with a negative connotation. Yeah. And I think most people, when they think of it today, will probably attribute or associate it with negative things, with corruption, with power grabs, with all sorts of things that are not aligned with what I think intrinsically it can be. And it's disheartening because what it does is it pushes a lot of young people away. I encourage a lot of people and a lot of young people and a lot of good people to get involved however they can, whether you're supporting a campaign, supporting policy, whatever it is, or running for office yourself. Why do I push people to do that? Because, in the Greek philosopher Plato, when you read his book on the Republic, one of the things Plato always says is, if the wise don't get involved in politics, you'll be governed by fools, right? So effectively, what that means is when you abdicate your responsibility, your civic responsibility to get involved in the governance of your society, and when all the good people don't participate because they say this is bad or this is dirty or we don't like this. So if all the good people are moving away, who is left? Right? And then we end up actually suffering the economic and social consequences of bad leadership, as we saw in the last several years. And so as a general principle, I think it's a civic responsibility to vote, to be politically active, and to ensure that we play our role as citizens, holding our leaders accountable, right? Pushing for the very sort of, because I always say, look, politicians reflect us as a society. Yeah. It's easy for us to say, these politicians are corrupt. They are corrupt, but so are we. True. It's true. Yeah. Go and who wants to be in line? We want to jump lines. I mean, it's a reflection of us as a society as well. And so the change cannot just be top down. It also has to be bottoms up. And we need to reflect the society we want to see if we want to see meaningful change.
Interesting. Pardon me if I'm still trying to... I'm a big believer in foundations. And so pardon me if I'm still exploring what it seems to be like the foundation of who you are as a person and all that you've achieved. Your education, formal education. So you went to Christ the King, went to Ghana International School, went to Pedy School, went to Harvard, studied African Studies, went back to economics, and then went to have a Juris Doctor, Harvard Law, MBA, Harvard Business School, International Human Rights, University of Oxford.
International Human Rights Law.
Yeah, Oxford University, and then University of Birmingham for a PhD in anthropology and African studies.
Yeah, economic anthropology.
Splendid. Great. Mind-blowing. But I want to understand, if you can remember, was it an intentional journey you decided to take in all of these academic journeys? Mm-hmm. And what informed your decisions in all these fronts? Right? So why did you go to Harvard to study African studies and economics? Why then decide to pursue law in Harvard Law School? Why did you decide to do an MBA? And what thinking went into you deciding to do human rights, law, and then anthropology and African studies?
Right. So it's a good question, and there are two things here. So the first is the question of why pursue so much school. Right?
Yes.
That I'll address first. And then I'll get to the specificities of the programs. So the first thing is, why so much school? Part of that is historical, and I'll explain. I come from Nandom, right, in the Upper West region of Ghana. And the history here matters. When the British came to Ghana, present-day Ghana, then Gold Coast, all of what is today Ghana was not a colony. The Gold Coast in the south was a colony. Then the north was a territory. Northern region, Savannah, those were territories. That was not a colony. And so the British approached the governance of these two geographic areas differently. When they first came, there was no education in the north. The education was in the south. Later, when they allowed education, they only allowed you to go up to class 6. Class 6. So much so that when we go to the year 1919, there were about 211 schools in the south, educating almost 30,000 students. There were, look at that too, 211, 30,000 students. The entire north only had 4 schools, educating 294 students. And so as far back as the 18th, 19th, you had 18th, 19th century, you had people from the south. You had Fantis with PhDs. Yes, Ghanaians had PhDs from Oxford, Cambridge, and the leading European universities. The first person from the north with a first degree was 1963. My father graduated with his degree in 1970. So there's nobody my age from the North who is more than 2 generations educated. Right? So that's one element of it.
Oh.
So when I pursue education in the way I pursue it, part of it is the Lord has blessed me with a brain that works differently. And so part of it is to honor him with that. And part of it is to honor my ancestors and my people who never had the opportunity to go to school, let alone. There is no way my grandfather could have ever dreamed in his lifetime. He couldn't even have the audacity to dream that his grandson would be in school, would go to Harvard, would go to Oxford. It was not in so for me, it's bigger than me, right? And it is it's to also inspire others to take it up and to say that, look, once you have that blessing from God, you maximize it to the fullest of your potential, right? And that's what the late Dr. Sule Gariba, who was a very close mentor of mine, a brilliant man. Before he died, Dr. Gariba told me when I was a young kid that whatever gifts and talents God gives you, you carry it to the fullest of your potential. And I know he's looking down on us from heaven, and I hope Uncle Sule is proud that I've listened to his advice.
So essentially, a strand of this is that you're making a statement, one, and then you are carrying your ancestors along.
Yes.
Now, the second part of the question.
The second part, in terms of the specificities of what I did, it's easy to look at it now and it seems almost a straight line, but it wasn't so. When I first went to Harvard University, I went to study pre-med, like every good, sensible African child, right? You know how it is.
School.
As my uncle told me growing up, he said, hey, there are 4 options. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, and fool. So when I didn't do medicine and I decided to do economics, and I wanted my economics to be focused on development economics, so I added African studies. My uncle was very upset because I had clearly fallen into the 4th category. So that was, I went in pre-med, but I fell in love with economics, and I was fascinated by how it gave you tools to understand the world. Because the world runs on, I mean, you know it. It affects everything from elections to your day-to-day life to, it gives you the tools to understand how the world works, right? So from there, 19 years ago was when I founded Golden Palm Investments. So I was very young when I founded it because I had a big thesis. I had actually done, I'm a nerd.
What's 19, 20?
Yes, 2000. I was 19 when I was 19 when I set it up. And at that time, I had done, so to give you a sense of the context there, I always had these interesting hypotheses about how Africa's development would evolve. And the nerd that I am, I went and I crunched global economic data, right? So just looking at how have other countries developed from the year 1000 AD to the year 2000. And I wanted to look at a 1,000-year perspective because that's where you see all the trends, right, over a long period of time. And I was trying to understand, okay, in different regions, how did they happen? Across different periods, how did they happen? And I found certain themes that were consistent across time and across geography. There were similar things that happen once per capita income reaches a certain level. Similar things happen when urbanization rates reach a certain... There were just similar things happening. And my thesis was very simple. Why should Africa be any different? Do we have 3 heads? Right? Why should we be any different? And so I kept talking about it. And I had this roommate who actually shared a bunk bed, Jamie Stern. Very, very, very successful fund manager today in the US. Runs a very large $4 billion fund. And Jamie, I used to joke in freshman year, I said, this guy is going to be our generation's Warren Buffett. When he was, and I used to joke that when he was 5 years old, when you were 5, what did you get for your birthday?
I don't think I remember. Nothing, maybe.
Probably some toy or something.
Extra meat.
Yes, extra meat or toy or Fanta. When he was age 5, they gave him Microsoft stock in Microsoft, and we're teaching him how to invest. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So by the time this guy got, by the time we were first year in universities, his knowledge was very different. This guy was investing, understood the markets. And me, I didn't know those things. So, Chairman, teach me. Yeah. Right? I humbled myself and he taught me. And he's the one who told me, he said, your idea is a great idea. You should invest behind it. I said, what do you mean? He said, you this thesis you have means that there's, and I said, okay, but with what money? He said, raise money. I said, from who? Right. Who come to Ghana at that time? You're talking of almost 20 years ago. Who here is going to give you money to do what? Right? We didn't have that sort of setup. Yeah. So he actually taught me how to put together a pitch deck. He taught me how to, and he wrote me my first check and helped me. And then I went around, gave presentations elsewhere to other classmates and so on and so forth. And that's how I raised the first round of capital, $50,000. 19 years ago for Golden Palm Investments. And I think there's a lot of lessons there, right? And I always say, and this is why I get very annoyed when you have all these people giving all these motivational talks and lying to young people. I don't like that. I like honesty, right? And it will be disingenuous and intellectually dishonest of me to sit and come here and tell you that, yeah, genius brain and all of that. Yes, God has blessed me with some natural. God has blessed me with a sharp brain. I will not deny that. But there are people in Ghana. There are people who are smarter than me. I am telling you, there are people who are smarter than me, but they don't have opportunity. Right? So it wasn't anything intrinsic. Yeah. Part of it was blessings and privilege. Right? Yeah. I happened to get accepted into Harvard, which in and of itself is a blessing. It's very difficult. Now 60,000 people are, their acceptance rate is less than 3%. So just getting that alone is a huge advantage. Yeah. Now I happen to be randomly assigned to a room with somebody who was third generation Harvard, whose family is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Does that have anything to do with me? No. Right? And this is someone who was then able to teach me, right? And I was able to learn from that. He gave me my first break, connected me with, you see where I'm coming from? And of course, there's certain things I had to do. I had to work hard. I had to produce the returns needed. I had to be humble enough to put myself at his feet to learn. I had to have integrity where it was easy for people to try. There are certain things you do, but it's dishonest to try and go there and just say, oh, just work hard. Working hard alone doesn't do it, right? You need a good amount of luck and blessings, as we call it here. And there's social capital and network. There's certain things that privilege affords you those advantages. And of course, and I say it's not just privilege, because if it was, when people also see someone who succeeded and say, oh, it's just because this person is so-and-so or had so-and-so, then if that's the case, everybody privileged to be successful, should they not? But that's not the case. So it's important to have the full picture. There's certain things that play a role. Hard work plays a role. What you put in plays a role. But privilege also plays a role. Social capital plays a role. Your network plays a role. Your credential plays a role. And that's the full picture.
So now I get the narrative on how you got to Harvard, studied African Studies and Economics. Why did you decide to do law?
Yeah, so at that moment, I had set up Golden Palm Investments, and I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I'd been an entrepreneur for a long time, from before I knew what entrepreneur was.
I just thought you'd tell about how you monetized helping your friend with his homework.
Exactly. And when, but even prior to that, when they were first doing the road at East Legon, when we moved to East Legon, it was all bush. All bush. In fact, one of the things that sometimes I wake up, I think about it and I say, hey, daddy pa. Back then when East Legon was bush, on Lagos Avenue, they had the chief, my father had an opportunity, because back then it was so cheap, because nobody wanted East Legon. If you were dashing somebody in East Legon, they'll tell you, what do I want to do in that forest? He had an opportunity to buy 100 plots there. And he said, what am I going to do in this forest? Oh. Thank you. Can you imagine? And not just anywhere, Lagos Avenue.
God.
Sometimes I want to wake up and say, this man, pa. So, so I knew, so back then when they were doing the road, we would put water, just tie water, put it in my brothers and I put it in the fridge, or we could come back and we'll sell it because for you to get water or buy anything, you have to go very, 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 very far. Yeah. Back then, Tete Kwashe was not what you see it. It was a massive circle with just dirt on it. Then my mother found the coins in my pocket. And then we got in trouble. She said, how can we charge the people doing our road? So the takeaway from me, my lesson there, was not that don't charge the people doing the road. It was that when you get money, hide this from mommy. So when I started tutoring people, I knew that if I charge them money, mommy will find the coins, I'll be in trouble. So they paid me with food. Oh. Yes. And one of them, Niamankwa Ado, my very dear friend. Niamankwa used to have these amazing, he used to have, my mother is a health nut. So my mother there, she will give you the multi-grain brown bread. If my mother is putting butter, it will be the fat-free one. Then she was very chisel when it came. No sugar in anything, no soda, none of that. Niamankwa will come with corned beef sandwich.
All the calories.
They're very nice food. So he'll pay me with the food. And I used to help him with homework. And so I've always had sort of these, I was always entrepreneurially minded. But because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur full time, I wanted to also make sure that I had the right tools and the right, I had everything I needed to make sure I'll be successful. And I recognized that having more knowledge, more training, and having the right sort of background would enable me to be successful in raising capital, in running the business, and in establishing credibility. Also recognizing that I was very young. Okay. Right. So that's kind of what informed the JD MBA. The PhD, it part of it was came from my father just encouraging it. He said, look, if you can, you should. Pursue. He said, look, if you, and he's the one, of course, who always shares, this is the history of our people. We've never had this opportunity. So he never forced me. My parents never forced me to do anything. But it was just encouraging to say, look, if you can do it, why not? So I did that at the same time, as I mentioned, with those programs. And then Oxford was, I was invited to join the Africa Advisory group at Oxford University and supporting the Rhodes Scholarship. And I was invited to be so I'm on the selection committee of the Rhodes Scholarship for West Africa. I've been on the selection committee since it was set up. So through that, I got to learn a lot about Oxford. I got to go on campus, and I was like, this place is fascinating, right? Harvard was founded in 1636. We're technically older than America. America was created in, as you know, 1776. So, I thought Harvard was very old, 1636, and then you go to Oxford, there was a war at Oxford in the college that I was in. That's from the year 900 AD. You're going somewhere and they'll tell you, 1342. And I'm just like, wow, I thought that was old, right? And I was amazed by what I saw there. And so I decided to just look into it. Wasn't anything serious. And then I saw this program, which fascinated me. I was very interested in it. I've always been passionate about human rights, and I've always had a deep intellectual interest in the law, which is why I studied law and became a licensed lawyer. And so that's kind of what explained the Oxford part. Yeah.
All right. So now we already touched on your early scorings with entrepreneurship and how you started Golden Palm Investments. Now you've invested in Flutterwave. You've invested in Andela and Pharma, iconic startups. So from the young man who was 19, started this Golden Palm Investments with $15,000 in investment, to being the one backing these iconic startups in the African ecosystem. To the best of your knowledge, up the top of your head, walk us through that journey. How did all this play out?
Right. Again, it looks like a straight line, but it wasn't. Right. When we first started, we were more of a venture studio in the sense that we would come up with ideas and we'll build the business ourselves. We'll incubate it from scratch, hire a team, build it. So I'll give you clear examples. I had a thesis around, I told you when I crunched the data, we realized that around the world, as per capita income increased, consumption of protein went up. All over the world, consumption of protein goes up significantly. So the thesis here also was, well, consumption of protein should go up in Ghana as well. So we set up an agriculture company. We invested in aquaculture, invested in tilapia farms in the lake. I found the best feed in the world that was in Taiwan that we're bringing in so that we'll have the biggest fish with a lot of protein. And then we also had a thesis around, so that was on the fish side. We also invested in cattle, right, for beef consumption. And then we also invested in
1920.
Yeah, we also invested in maize, right? Because again, the data we had seen from other places show that you generally also saw not just an increase in protein consumption, but you also saw quite an increase also in the consumption of corn and maize, right? So we did that. We had another thesis that at the time, the average birth rate per woman in Africa was 5.9, right? Compared to, China is 1.1, right? Europe is under 2. And so what does it mean? And we know this. Look, in the next 25 years, Africa's population is doubling. We're going to be 2.5 billion. What does it mean to have so many babies? What do babies need? Baby food. So we went out, we bought, we went to Kenya, bought a manufacturing business to make baby food. So those are the sorts of things we were doing. And so we did a similar thing in financial services around the thesis of globalization and how merchants would trade. We had a similar thesis around healthcare. So we're doing all these things. Then had a big thesis on technology because I was seeing how technology was disrupting things in the US and elsewhere. And I believe very strongly that technology is going to have an even greater impact in our world because it allows for a certain leapfrogging, right? So on the back of that, we set up a technology company at the time, Golden Palm Technology Limited. Now, what we learned painfully was that with general entrepreneurial, savviness and business knowledge, Yeah, we created a healthcare business, we created agriculture, we created financial services, we created a real estate business, which was where that $5 million debt or hala came, right? We created all these businesses, and it wasn't difficult to do. I didn't have to be an expert at real estate to run a real estate business, because it's intuitive. I could hire the right people. Yeah. Technology. If you don't understand C+, can you talk to the programmers? So that was where I said, we're in trouble. Yeah. Right? None of us, and we are not programmers, we don't understand this world.
And this team consisted of Jamie Stan.
No, so Jamie was wrote the check, right? He was my first investor. I'm talking of the team I built.
Okay.
So when I set it up, I actually partnered with my brother, who I still work with. We've been working together for about 20 years.
Okay.
And of course, we made other hires. We brought in some other partners, etc. It can't just be one man or two men running this whole enterprise. And so we then went out and started looking and realized that, look, we don't know this thing, but we're seeing all these people doing interesting tech things. What we do know is business. We know business. So we said, why don't we go and we can help some of these tech startups grow, expand. We can give them some money. We can leverage. And that's how we became accidental venture capitalists. Oh. So our first VC vehicle was that technology company incorporated, where we put in capital in it and use this balance sheet to invest. So what we are now doing was the other businesses we created was creating cash. So the cash generated from there, we are investing in tech.
Okay.
Then it got to a point where tech just took off in a massive way. And that's when we divested from all the businesses except healthcare to really focus on tech, because it was clear that was the future and that was going to be the greatest source of returns.
Oh, okay. Makes a lot of sense. So I really understand, how did you meet, look, these two, I'm really interested in these two stories, M-Pharma and Della Flatwave. How did you meet Greg?
Yeah, so when it comes to, M-Pharma, so Greg and I knew of each other. Ghana, everyone really knows everyone. It's a small, I always joke that Ghana is almost insane. You have to be careful if you don't take time. You have to, we're just such a small place that everyone kind of knows everyone. And so Greg and I actually connected in Zambia, Lusaka. I was in Lusaka doing research for my book.
Oh, okay.
And Greg was there meeting with the Ministry of Health, and he was thinking of piloting the original idea from M-Pharma at the time, which was this e-prescription. And at the time, M-Pharma hadn't yet been set up. Yeah. So I'm at the airport. I see this young person with some government delegation has come to pick the person. There's a bunch of 4x4s outside. So I'm just like, hey, who is this important person here? The person turns, I see his big head. I say, Greg, but what are you doing here? So we started laughing. And we said, okay, let's grab drinks this evening and catch up. So we grabbed drinks. We were at a bar in Lusaka. And we're grabbing drinks, and Greg is telling me about the idea. And at that moment, I just knew. Something hit me. I just knew. I said, this idea is brilliant. And so immediately, I went and Greg and I laugh about this story. I went to an ATM. Kid you know, I took out money and I told Greg, look, I'm going to make a deposit. Wow. I'm going to make a deposit here. We're going to get involved in this. And I remember calling Alex Marlantes in California, who was one of my partners on the investment committee. And I said, Alex, there's this idea. I said, it's going to sound crazy. Keep in mind that Greg had never worked a day in his life. Greg's first job after university was being CEO of M-Pharma. So imagine me going to, and I'm telling them that, look, I know this is going to sound crazy. And Greg's co-founders also had just graduated from university. I mean, they are as green as possible. In fact, his first chief technology officer, when we interviewed him and we asked him, what's your experience? He said he was president of the computer science club. Right. So I call Alex and I say, Alex, I know you are going to think I'm a madman for what I'm about to tell you, but I think this has legs. Okay. And this is either going to be one of the best investments we'll make, or this is going to be, I said, there's no middle ground. It will either be a big winner or it will be zero. There is no middle ground here. So he gets on a flight, comes to Ghana. We meet the team. Golden Tulip at the time. So it was Greg and his two co-founders. We met them. We spent a lot of time with them. And Alex and I go and debrief. And Alex says, you are right. This is either going to, you and I are either going to be heroes from this, or we are going to look back and everybody is going to say, are you people stupid? How do you invest in a bunch of inexperienced green people with zero work experience with just an idea? But we felt very strongly in it.
Yeah. And
so that's how it started. We gave a term sheet, we invested, and M Pharma's first office was my conference room in East Legon. That's literally where, and helped. I mean, those days I was going to Greg with meetings, traveling, fundraising, and so M Pharma is so near and dear to my heart because I was there as I was born, and of course, fast forward, the rest is history. Andela. So I had some very close friends. Walter Badu, who is the managing partner of 4DX. 4DX is one of the premier venture firms on the continent. And his partner, Peter Orth, who were friends of mine. And Sheil Tile. Sheil is one of the most brilliant human beings I've met. Sheil went to Stanford University when he was 16. Finished it in 2 years. Sheil overlapped with me. We were both at Harvard Law together. While he was at Harvard Law, he was the head of seed practice at NEA, which is one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. He now runs his own he runs his own fund, several billions of dollars of assets under management. He is absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. His brother also. I always used to joke. His brother, Sujay, set up Frontier Car Group, which we invested in, and that was our first full exit. Naspers acquired them in 2019, just before COVID hit, for $700 million. Wow. Right. So as for that family, I always used to joke with Sheil's mom, Sheil and Sujay's mom. I said, Mommy, whatever the milk you give them, I won't tell anybody. You just tell me so that I can be giving it to my children. Yeah. So they were good friends with, they knew E, and they also knew Jeremy Johnson. So they connected me to them. So through that, and funny enough, I even interviewed E for my book. So when I heard what they were doing in Andela and they were pitching it, I said, but this is a no-brainer. I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer. And it's not just a fantastic financial investment. It's an amazing investment in terms of the social impact and the multiplier effect and the ecosystem impact, right? So we invested in Andela. And Flutterwave was simple. E
did it.
When E left Andela, I said, hey, where are you going? He said, I have this startup idea. I said, I'm in. Because right? No, seriously, he will tell you. Before they even set up the staff, we wired money into his this thing. He'll tell you. We did sign immediately. And it ended up being one of the greatest. And you see, that's why sometimes I say that in all of this also, yes, there's the analysis you do and all of that, but a lot of it is also just faith and being guided by the Spirit. It did not make sense that but at that time, Flutterwave, when we did the first deal, it was at a valuation of $2.5 million, right? Which in cedi terms, at that time, was 10 million Ghana cedis. That was what it was valued. 10 million Ghana cedis. 10 million Ghana cedis when we invested. Do you know what the last valuation was? 45 billion Ghana cedis. 45 billion Ghana cedis. So that's an increase in valuation of 4,500 in GHS terms. Right? Great. And to me, that tells a powerful story about the the possibility of what happens when you give young Africans opportunity. Right? How many more flutter waves are out there? How many more Andeles and M farmers are out there that have not been fulfilled simply because we have not given opportunity to young people? That's why I'm very excited about some of the initiatives President Mahama is championing. The Ijurama program they launched where to help catalyze 10,000 startups a year.
1 million coders.
The 1 million coders. You see, these things, if executed well, will really be able to boost the ecosystem.
You told us, there's a story you told about how you wanted, Andela wanted to set up a campus, you wanted to bring it to Ghana, but then our people embarrassed you. Yeah.
Because my dream at the time was Ashesi, a leader in computer science, engineering, all of that. I wanted us to, Andela, to build their HQ for Africa, their hub for Africa, co-located there. Then we can bring IBM, Google, Microsoft. So we almost create this cluster, right, of tech giant. We create an ecosystem, bring MES, bring all, right? That was the big dream. And unfortunately, our people disgraced us. I brought them, and they were going to invest $70 million. And we wasted our time. Instead of focusing on, and instead of recognizing how positive this would be for the country, our people were more interested in what's in it for me.
Yeah.
That money you're investing, can I get some in my pocket? So I was embarrassed. So I called a very close friend of mine, a sister of mine, who Claire Akamanzi, who I knew from Harvard, who was, at the time, she was in Paul Kagame's cabinet, the president of Rwanda. She was in the cabinet. She was CEO of the Rwanda Development Board. So I called her and I said, my sister, my country has disgraced me, please. This is a brilliant idea. Can you look into it? So she looked into it. She said, bring them. Bring them. So we go to Rwanda. They look at it and they say, wait, you guys are going to invest in creating these developers. You match them with work abroad. And they are saying, okay, your top developers are able to earn $100,000. We as a country, they are staying here. They don't need to travel. So there's no brain drain. Mm-hmm. I can tax them and get that $20,000. So it's positive for me. And I'm creating this ecosystem. And you're seeing it now. You know how in the US you have the PayPal mafia. Now we have the Andela mafia. Right? They're going out creating.
Stock mafia.
Yes. It's a no-brainer. So much so that Rwanda said, come, we'll give you tax holiday. 10 years, come. You want the campus, come, don't build it anywhere. We'll give you land. Hey, come. The money, how many engineers do you say you create? 2,000? No. We'll match you dollar for dollar, make it double. That is a forward-thinking government. That is a government that understands what it takes to build a sustainable ecosystem. And that's a government that understands that why would you take $1 million and put it in your pocket today where you can create a system that will generate 100 times that in the long term? That's a forward-thinking government. That's a forward thing. And that's why Rwanda, they are so serious. You can set up a company in Rwanda in a matter of hours. Online. You don't need to go to anybody. You don't need to have what? Online. If we are serious about championing entrepreneurship and catalyzing growth, why is it so, why should it be wahala? I can, and I've done it. I've sat in Ghana and I've set up a company in the US online. Just do it now. Go to legalzoom.com. Yeah. In a matter of hours, you have a company incorporated in Delaware. But we rather need to have a lot more. We make it difficult. Why should it be difficult? Why should it be difficult?
I would like to touch on your experience as a CEO for CarePoint, but I'll shelve it for now. Still on this matter, your book, just so we speak to entrepreneurship in Africa as a whole, your book does that, making futures, young entrepreneurs in a dynamic Africa, where you go around, you spoke to several entrepreneurs. During the research process, you spoke to 600 entrepreneurs over the course of 7 years, 45 African countries.
I spoke to over 1,000.
Right.
But I did in-depth interviews with 600.
600.
So
Yeah.
deep 1 hour plus interviews, some of them several hours, multiple days. So in depth was 600, but met over 1,000.
That's like someone's life work. Someone can just do that and go to bed. So I want to understand, right? Especially with your perspective on entrepreneurship in Africa as a whole, and how, because we have the view with this podcast. I believe, Armand, I think I told you when I was sending it right up, there's a conviction we have that entrepreneurs are going to build this continent. And that has been the tale for almost every developed economy in the world now.
Yeah.
And so you going into this project, who were you before going to this project? And what did you become after that process? With regards to your perspective on the African continent, entrepreneurially speaking, talking about entrepreneurship.
So what kickstarted? So look, I had ideas for a while and I've always wanted to tell the story. But what kickstarted it was 2013, October 2013. You know what happened?
Yes.
So at that moment I said, look, I'm not putting off these things anymore. What if I had died? Then these ideas and these dreams all die. So that's when I jumped into it. Look, I didn't know it would take as long as it did. Let me be honest, right? It took, as you know, the whole process took quite some time. It took 7 years. But it transformed the way I looked at the world. It transformed the way I looked at Africa. And that's why today I caution people when they want to talk about Africa this, Africa that. Africa what? What Africa are you talking about? You sat in Accra and your village and you want to talk of Africa. We need to have humility when we make certain generalizations. Or someone wants to sit and say, yeah, you know, in Ghana, what Ghana? When your experiences of Ghana is airport, Laboni, East Legon, and maybe Easter, you go to the village. Can you really purport to speak of Ghana? I've been to every region in Ghana, right? And I've combed throughout all of Ghana. And when you do that, it humbles you. It makes you realize that you need to make sure that your perspectives are properly grounded. So when we talk of Africa, what Africa are we talking about? There are 54 countries. And when you visit and you see a lot of them, you realize that there are certain things in which it's the same story, and there are certain things in which we could not be any more different. Right? And that's why when people get upset and say, you know, you see people online, what's this Africa that they are showing? And they want to show the nice houses at Airport Hill, Central Sacco. Look, we have MTV Cribs in Africa. And then you have others who are just showing the pop. And I say you're both right and both wrong. Africa, Ghana is not Airport Hills, and neither is it children with kwashiorkor with flies.
So much nuance.
There's so much nuance. It's all the above and more, right? And so I think for me, it is the humility to understand the limits of our experiences and the discovery of deep nuance, right? And an appreciation for those nuances, right?
Yeah. So did it make you more hopeful?
It did. It did. It made me hopeful in the sense of recognizing that there's still a lot more that unites us than divides us.
Okay.
And that the challenges we face cut across similar challenges. And I feel very strongly that the fortunes of our continent and our destinies are tied together, right?
With that kind of experience, if I were to ask you that, if you had all the resources, right, all the resources to tackle one particular problem that plagues the African continent, what would it be?
So, you know, I was at the Africa Philanthropy Forum some years ago. Mm-hmm. This was a long time ago, actually. This must have been more than 8 years ago. I was speaking on a panel. And a question was asked of, you know, let's say if you could invest $1 billion or so into any single thing. So it was touching as a similar thing,
Yeah.
right? Where someone would say, look, invest it in infrastructure or do electrification, right? So that all of Africa has electricity. That's all we need. And then we'll figure out the rest, etc., etc. What I said I would do with $1 billion is I said I would invest $1 billion in Ashesi. And let me explain my thinking there.
Wow.
I can invest in electricity, I can invest in clean water, I can invest in what have you, and I'll solve that problem. But there'll be more problems that'll come. I wouldn't even be able to solve all the problems too, because you said one thing. And even if I solve that, tomorrow a new problem will come. Or I can invest in the ecosystem that produces the problem solvers who will solve the problems of today and tomorrow. And that to me is what will sustainably put us on a different path. Making sure that we have the right sort of ethical, entrepreneurially minded leaders across the board in private sector and public sector. Because when you have the right leadership, the rest will take care of itself.
Wow. Let me ask you this question, Sangu. I intend to ask it later, but I would like to ask it now. With all the work you do, I mean, now you actually sit on the board for Ashesi University. And so it must mean a lot to you with what you do. In all your pursuits, what you're doing now, what gives you the deepest sense of meaning?
So, for me, it's actually very simple, right? It's three things that are the forefront of all of this, right? In terms of your question of meaning. The first is do I glorify God through it? Do I bring pride to my parents? And do I set an example for my daughter? That's it. And when it meets those three things, it gives me great joy, great purpose.
Wow. CarePoint Africa. You're the CEO for CarePoint Africa as well. Forward tech-driven health startup company. What's it about? What's the thesis there? What are you trying to achieve there?
So on CarePoint, look, we said we want to build Africa's healthcare future, right? Across the continent, we have about 17% of global population. Yet we are responsible for 25% of the global disease burden, which means that at any given moment, every 4 diseases in the world, 1 is in Africa. Just think about that. Meanwhile, for every 4 people in the world, 1 is not in Africa, right? So we have a disproportionate amount of the disease burden. And to make this worse, we only have 3% of global healthcare workers. So imagine, out of every 100 diseases, out of every 100 people in the world, 16 are Africans. But out of every 100 sick people, 25 are Africans. And out of every 100 medical personnel globally to help solve this, only 3. And we represent only 1% of global healthcare expenditure. You see the problem with that? Now, factor on top of that, layer on that the demographic explosion that we're going to double our population in 25 years. So if we already have this problem at 1.5 billion, what do we do when we're at 2.5 billion? And so, and even if you gave me a check of $10 trillion to invest in healthcare in Africa today, do you know how long it takes to get a neurosurgeon? By the time you catch up in the traditional way of doing things, we probably would have lost millions, if not tens of millions of people. And so it requires a very different approach. It requires us to see how we can leverage technology. It requires us to see how we can move and think about it also not just at a micro level, but at a macro level, public health, health systems, preventive care. And especially when you look at the data and the trends that we are shifting away from infectious diseases towards NCDs, non-communicable diseases, hypertension, diabetes, right? The rise in oncology, cancer. These things, our health system is not built. Our health infrastructure has been developed mostly for infectious diseases. We're not ready yet for the sort of strain that NCDs are going to introduce to the system. And so we can't do business as usual. So for us at CarePoint, our goal has been to build this tech-forward network of hospitals, clinics, health facilities, to leverage technology, to leverage AI for us to be able to really move into predictive medicine and personalized medicine, and to leverage economies of scale and scope to create efficiencies, to create greater clinical outcomes, right? So to make people get better care effectively, right? And to try and use technology to reduce the cost of care, right? And ultimately, we want to democratize access. We want to make sure that as many people as possible can get access to quality care. And that is our raison d'etre.
Okay. Interesting. On this one, it touches like healthcare and like health for Africa. You did this project, Clean Aqua, where you were providing access, like enhancing access to like potable water. I think you've completed the project in 2022. At the time, you had touched about 200,000 people, hundreds of communities. This is not a question. It's just like, thank you for doing what you did on that front. So now back to you as a person. Now you're a chief. You're a chief?
Yes.
You're a chief. So now Malu.
Maluna.
What does that mean?
So Maluna is basically development chief.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I've been tasked by a Paramount King to set up a development plan for the municipality and to focus especially on the development of our youth and our women in Nandom.
Okay. Yeah. How's it going?
Look, it's been great. We, as you know, I moved the headquarters of my foundation to Nandom. Yeah. So we've been doing a lot of projects in education, in health, and in economic empowerment. We launched Project 1000 to empower 1,000 women entrepreneurs. Right, we've been doing that, setting them up to. We're doing 200 hairdressers, 200 seamstresses, 200 traders, 200 weavers, 200 pito brewers. Right. We are also doing this partnership with the Nandom Rural Bank. Okay. You want to borrow today 35 to 40% interest rate. I always say, are you selling cocaine? No, how? If you are paying 40% interest rate, how much profit are you going to make? Right? And this, again, is the economic consequences of bad leadership and failed economic policies. It trickles down, right? So what we then said was, look, you can't expect a young woman, a young man who's trying to start a business to be paying 40%. So we're doing a partnership between my foundation where we say that give the young man and young woman the loan. Instead of the 40%, we'll do a partial guarantee of the loan. So instead of 40%, bring it down to 30%. Okay? Or 25 or whatever, because there's a guarantee, so your risk is diminished. Now we're saying that only charge them 10%, and the balance, we the foundation will pay. So that it helps to support them, and then until at least they're on their feet, right? We launched education. The BEC pass rate was 11%, and Nandom actually has some of the highest educational qualifications per capita in the country. There's no house in Nandom that doesn't have a PhD, a doctor, because I told you before, we didn't have any school, so everybody is agre. Right? Yeah. We have a saying, and also Nandom, first of all, our soil is hard. Even growing stuff in our soil is difficult. We don't have any natural resources. So in Nandom, we always say that the only thing we have is our God and our brain. So from childhood, Your parents and your grandparents will give it to you that, hey, there's no this thing for you. You better go and learn. But now the standards have fallen. BEC pass rate of 11%. So we're investing in, we're providing grants to try and support the schools. We've launched a teacher training program. We trained about 600 or 700 of, we had a program that trained about 600-700 of them. This was last year. We brought some international educators. And we are launching a teaching prize for excellence, where we're saying that the teachers who have had the biggest improvement over a 3-year period in their student performance, will give you a large prize, 10,000 CDs, we'll buy you a ticket, all expenses paid, trip to Dubai. I want teachers to know that, look, because right now, you perform, you don't perform, you're all getting the same salary. Like, what is the motivation to do well? Right? And they are when you go and talk to them, no, the last school I visited, no textbooks. No, I mean, it's very depressing. It's very, very, very depressing. In fact, there was one teacher teaching the whole JSS. So when he's teaching JSS 1, JSS 2, and JSS 3 have nothing. Then he'll teach, and he's teaching all subjects. I mean, how? How? What sort of society are we building if we're not properly investing? And that's why, when I critiqued the free SHS, it wasn't the argument I made is it is a great thing in principle, but you look at Vietnam. I visited Vietnam to study their economic miracle. Vietnam did not have free SHS when they enjoyed their economy, but what they did was they invested in super high quality basic education, very high quality. So I have always believed that we should do it progressively, right? And quality, make sure the quality here is very high. And the free, I don't believe it should be free for everybody. It should be means tested. Why should my children go to school for free when I can afford it? Do you understand what I'm saying? So when in a country where we have limited resources, it doesn't make sense. Why should all of us, people who live in all these areas who can afford it, why should we be going for free? Instead, we should have a means-tested program where below a certain income level, it should be free.
Yeah.
Above that, you pay. So that you are creating resources that can now be used to subsidize it. Yeah. And so that the money that's being spent on it can now be used for other things, to upgrade the quality, to upgrade the infrastructure, to do all these things. You see where I'm coming from? Already in an environment where we know, well, we have one of the lowest tax to GDP rates in the world. People don't pay taxes. A few of us who pay taxes were overtaxed. Right? Yeah. So now already people don't pay taxes. Mm-hmm. Now the school that they are paying to, you don't want them to pay. So how is government going to get the resources? Right? So I always thought that the goals were very laudable, but it was politicized and over-politicized. And that's the problem I have sometimes with how we approach education, health. Sometimes we over-politicize these things. And instead of, you take even Agenda 111, it doesn't make sense. I'm in healthcare, I can tell you it doesn't make sense. You are going to build 111 new hospitals. Do we have the medical staff for it? Do we? Why? Why would we waste? And the estimate has now come that it's going to cost almost close to the IMF bailouts. Does that make sense? It doesn't. What about our existing infrastructure, the CHIPS compounds? What are we doing with them? Why don't we upgrade the existing? Why don't we look at some of the novel ways of leveraging technology and so on and so forth to be able to reach the same goal, right? But when we have a system where our budget is not based on what is going to be the best for the country. It's based on what can I structure where I can do a deal here. That's the fact. Yeah. And I always say that if we don't face up to the facts of our situation and we don't understand the problem, we'll never have a solution. So I have a lot of very contrarian ideas. If you understand the political economy of corruption, you know that just getting up and saying stop the corruption, it won't do anything.
Yeah.
Because contrary to what people think, the people who get the corrupt money, a good amount stays in their pockets, but a good amount also trickles down. Go to any MP and visit them in their office and see what you see. You will see a line that will wrap around. Every day, people are coming to give them pressure. School fees, hospital, this, that, all of that is on their head. Because there's an expectation that they need to solve those problems. Right? If they don't solve it, what happens?
Vote.
You are voted out. And they always joke that apparently they say Adenta for the longest time. Nobody does more than one term in Adenta. Adenta, they will just sack you. Right? So you are, even for somebody who goes in and says, you are forcing the person to be corrupt. Because how much is the MP paid? Look at his salary and look at the demands. No, you get where I'm coming from. Then you
the people are not empowered economically. They will place burdens on these politicians and they will in turn do other things.
And the only reason the people are having those issues is because there's a void. The failure of our governance has created a void. If we had solved for those issues, those sorts of pressures are not, so we have to look at it holistically.
Yeah. If
we don't, we'll be sitting here. You invite me in 5 years, we'll be having the same conversation. Right.
Yeah. You're very passionate. It's clear about Africa and Ghana. And I mean, we've pointed out some of like the buttresses to who you are as a person now and your passion for Africa, your exposure with your parents, your upbringing. But there's something interesting you mentioned, that when you're growing up, you're reading books with your dad, right?
Yeah.
From Shakespeare to The Economist. I want to just touch on, we understand that.
And please, my father clearly made sure I read all of Nkrumah's books.
Great. It's actually the question about to ask us to, we believe that one wing rung of exposure, people who go on to do great things are people who are exposed, right? And then one rung of exposure is reading. So I want to understand, are there like 3 books or 3 thinkers that have really, really shaped your perspective as a person about the African continent?
Yes. So, of course, Nkrumah, right? And I always say, whether or not you agree with him, no one will argue that he was one of the most brilliant thinkers of his time, right? And I would argue in our region of all time. Absolutely brilliant and worth reading. So he was extremely influential, all right, in shaping a lot of my thinking there. Another person whose writings and speeches I think also played a massive role for me was Madiba, right? Mandela. Madiba. Also, because for him it was, so I'll say Nkrumah, the big part of Nkrumah was around his philosophy, right? And his thought leadership. For Madiba, it was around moral leadership, right? And a lot of lessons around moral leadership. And a third that I'll put, which actually would sound maybe surprising at first glance, for me is Chimamanda Adichie. Right, it's Chimamanda, because while the others are more historical, Chimamanda gives you contemporary insight into not just Africa, but the African diaspora as well. Yeah.
When I asked you which of the things you're doing brings you a deep sense of meaning, you gave me a criteria for what will qualify.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about God, parents, and then your daughter. Mm-hmm. You've touched on the first 2. I saw a tweet recently about you and talking about how your daughter wanted to go to the beach.
Yes.
And she's 3 years old, and she's not feeling too well, and then you told her when she's better you go. And she brought the crucifix.
Yes.
She said she's well in Jesus' name, so you could go to the beach. And the question I want to ask is that, what does she mean to you? She as a variable come into your life.
Yes.
What dynamic has she brought?
the older you get, the more you understand your parents, right? And a lot of things, it pains me to admit this, because when I was young, look, your parents would say this, you roll your eyes, your eyes want to fall down. You know, they'll be like, one day you'll be a parent and you'll see. And you're just like, oh. But there's a lot of truth to that. There's a certain type of love that is unimaginable, unfathomable, indescribable until you experience it. And that is the love of a parent when you have a child. You know, I was joking with a friend that I need to go back to all my ex-girlfriends, going back to Stephanie Amatefio in class 4, and tell them that the love I told them I love them, I have to withdraw it, because I've now experienced what real love is, right? But it changes everything. And nothing else matters. Okay. When my daughter was born, I resigned from 11 boards. Right. And when I tell you nothing else matters, there is nothing else matters, right? There's no ambition. There's no anything that you put up that will be a threat to her well-being, her happiness, her development, her growth. I drop it, right? Because I believe that it is my responsibility as a parent. My number one responsibility is to raise her in faith, and to give her the tools to be a productive member of society, to be a kind person, to be a good person, and to be a person that will bring pride to me and bring glory to God.
Interesting. Is it fair to say that these three things are, because I was thinking, with all these numerous pursuits, you know, how do you keep yourself grounded as a person? Is it fair to say that these three things, your faith in God, love for your daughter, and maybe like love for your parents, keep you grounded?
Absolutely. Look, faith is, in fact, as soon as this is done, I go to Mass every day, right? So from here, I'm heading to Mass. That keeps me very grounded, right? I'm a minister of the Word. So that's my ministry. That also keeps me grounded. And family keeps me grounded, right? And you know, people who know my mother will know that it's difficult to have a big head when you have a mother like mine. I remember one time I had been featured in Forbes. I was very excited. I called my mother, very excited. Mommy, I'm in Forbes. Da, 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 da. This woman said, hey, the vitamins I told you to buy for your grandma, have you bought it? Like, I'm just there like, They completely dismissed the Forbes and was like, did you buy your grandmother's vitamins? But you see, what my mother was modeling for me was to not let things get to your head, and to not be confused by the smokes and mirrors of these things. It's all vanity. It's all vanity. And I repeat again, it's all vanity. All these things, it's vanity. At the end of the day, when you die, when someone is on their dying bed, I've never met anybody on their dying bed, and I've met a few, who have ever said, I wish I had gotten more magazine features, or I wish I had gotten more money. Or, nobody says that. What do they say? Talk to anybody on their dying bed. It boils down to they wish they had spent more time with family, or they wish they had, you know, their regrets. A lot of it is, right? Yeah. So, and in fact, the longest longitudinal study ever done was done at Harvard University on happiness. They followed young boys from World War II all the way till now. A lot of them are dead, but they followed it and they found that the single most important variable responsible for your happiness was relationships. Relationships. Because beyond a certain point, the money is what is meaningless. How many cars can you drive at the same time? How much food can you eat? And so sometimes we get caught up in the meaningless things in life. But one day life will hit you. And when it hits you, you realize that it's all vanity.
You and I are exactly a decade apart, age-wise. And like I told you in the beginning, you represent a certain idea.
But our beards look the same age.
Yeah. And you sort of represent what it means for me to be a person of capacity and be spent on the African cause. From this conversation, I understand that we aligned on a lot of things. Decades apart, a decade into the future. If there's something you could tell me now, you see myself as a what's it called? Point of contact for young entrepreneurs who are trying to build something valuable for this African continent. And just as human beings, a decade ahead, what would you tell me?
I will mostly tell you things I wish I had known a decade earlier, right? So that, there's a proverb, I think it's a Chinese proverb or so, that says that the fool does not learn from his mistakes. The smart man learns from his mistakes, but the wise man learns from the mistakes of others, right? And so invariably you make your own mistakes. That is life. But if I can share some of my mistakes in the hopes that you avoid those, I think that's probably the best I can do. And I'll share a few of them. Number one is, one big mistake I made, which I've changed now, is, when I was younger, for a long time, 20 years or so, I used to sleep an average of 4 hours a day. Right? It used to be a point of pride for me. When they are sleeping, I'm working. I used to tell young people, hey, work. Don't sleep, work. Then is it Proverbs also in the Bible where they talk about where you shouldn't be sleeping, or the thief. There are a lot of verses like that. I'll be like, work. I regret it. And I wish I could go back to all those young people I misled. I read, and there's a TED Talk and a book, Why Sleep Matters by Matt Walker. When you don't sleep, you're killing yourself. High correlation to Alzheimer's, cardiac issues, respiratory illnesses. I really make sure I sleep 7 to 8 hours, because when I wake up, I'm refreshed, I'm productive, I can do a lot more. Sleep. I know what I'm telling you. Sleep. Sleep. Take care of yourself. Take a break. Exercise. Eat well. Don't be drinking too much. No, I know what I'm telling you. These things will matter so much to your success in ways you will not appreciate. Okay? The second thing I'll tell you is, it goes back to that longitudinal study. Relationships matter. Nurture your relationships. Okay? Too often I find that nowadays there's a transactional approach to relationships, to friendships, to romantic relationships, to everything. It's very transactional. And that's not going to set you up for long-term success, right? Build authentic relationships. Get to know people. And don't always... One thing my mother taught me, which has really helped me in life with respect to relationships, is everybody wants to come and say, you want to hit up someone, what do you want from the person? But nobody wants to think about, what can you give? There was a young man, I will never forget him till the day I die, who was based in London, who had, again, reached out on Twitter. So we had a call. When we had the call, we spoke, all of that, and I was thrown aback by the question he asked me at the end, because I am used to, at the end, how can I help you? Tell me these are the 3-4 things, and I'll see how I can help. That's what I'm used to. His thing was, he said, I imagine you get contacted about that all the time, but my question for you is different. Is there any way I can help you? Is there anything you're doing that just whatever it is, what's bothered, like, even if it's a small way in which I can help you, I would love to. And I told you I'll never forget that guy, because that was the first time in my life anybody had asked that question. So don't always be looking at life in terms of what you can get, but look at it primarily from how you can give. And that's how my mom raised me. Most of my mentors, I didn't first reach out to them to collect. I reached out to learn and to give, because it is in giving that we receive.
Thank you very much, Sangu. Well, thank you on a personal level for representing an ideal and being who you are and making me aware that it is possible. And thank you for what you do for the African continent. For our community, thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and walking us through your life, essentially. And it's been a very heavy conversation. Hopefully we can do it again. And all the best in all you're doing. All the best in doing things that will bring glory to God. Pride to your parents and pride to your daughter. And God bless you.
Thank you. Amen. And as I said, it's a privilege. And I pray that, some people might get a few insights, learn one or two things, and hopefully maybe get inspired. But I'm inspired by the younger generation, and I am hopeful that the younger generation will be the catalyst to let us create and be the Africa that we deserve. Right. Thank you.
So, family in Accra, the world beyond. This is a conversation with Sangu Delle, and I hope you had a good time as much as I did. Dua.